Hey everybody, this is Travis. Welcome back to Green Valley Anglers. Today we're going to be diving deep into the world of trout fishing. We're going to cover the big five, the rainbow, the brook, cutthroat, brown, and lake trout. Strap in for 15 minutes of trout wisdom. Ready? Let's go. First up, let's take a look at all the major trout species we have here in the United States of America. We're going to be looking at the top five that are most targeted here. There is a lot of subspecies, but for this video's purposes, we're going to be looking at the top five. First is the rainbow trout. Known for their vibrant colors, rainbows are widespread and stocked all across the United States. They're native to the Pacific Northwest, highly adaptable. You can find them in rivers, you can find them in lakes, and if you're familiar with the steelhead, which is a version of rainbow trout, they migrate back and forth between the ocean. The brook trout, the native brookie of the east with beautiful spotted patterns. They prefer cold and clear streams and lakes, especially in higher elevations. Cutthroat trout. These are the true wildlings of the West, named for their distinctive red slash under their jaw. They're most at home in mountain streams, but can also be found in lakes. Brown trout. These are actually originally from Europe, and these are the wiliest of the bunch, known for their intelligence and their size. They thrive in both streams and still waters. Lake trout, the deep water dwellers, often found in the Great Lakes and large deep lakes in the north. They're the biggest of the group, growing to impressive sizes. Next up, let's look at their habitat and their distribution. Rainbows, from California to New York, stocked in countless places, but native to the West Coast. Brookies, primarily in the Northeast, Appalachians, and Great Lakes region, also in the Rockies. Cutthroats, mostly in the West, from Idaho to Montana, with subspecies like the Yellowstone cutthroat having a very specific local. Browns, after being introduced, they've spread across much of the country, excelling in the Midwest and the Northeast. Lake trout, found in the northern U.S., particularly in the Great Lakes, Northeast, and mountain states with deep, cold lakes. Let's switch gears and talk about their diet and their feeding habits. Rainbow trout. Rainbows are quintessential omnivores, showing adaptability in their feeding habits. They consume a wide array of insects at various life stages, from mayflies to midges. In addition to insects, they'll feed on small fish and crustaceans, and even plant matter, especially in environments with limited food sources. Their opportunistic nature means they'll eat what's most available, adjusting their diet based on season and habitat. Feeding habits. Rainbows are known for their feeding frenzies, especially during hatches or when bait fish are abundant. They'll surface feed during insect hatches and are equally comfortable foraging on the bottom for snails or nymphs. In lakes, they'll school up to hunt small fish, showing a more predatory side. Brook trout. Brook trout have a particular fondness for aquatic insects, with a heavy emphasis on mayflies, caddisflies, and stoneflies in their larval stages. However, they're not above taking terrestrial insects like ants or beetles when they fall into the water. Smaller brookies might mainly stick to insects, but larger ones will also prey on smaller fish, crustaceans, and even amphibians like tadpoles. Their feeding habits. Brook trout often feed close to cover, using structure to ambush prey. They're known for their voracious appetite during specific insect hatches, where they'll rise to the surface. In colder water, they'll become more opportunistic, taking whatever food source is easiest to capture, including small minnows or crayfish. Cutthroats. Their diet. Cutthroat trout share much of the rainbow's dietary habits, with a noted preference for terrestrial insects during the summer. They'll feed on a mix of aquatic insects, small fish, and occasionally amphibians or crustaceans. Their diet reflects the seasonal availability with a surge in terrestrial feeding when insects like grasshoppers are plentiful. Feeding habits. Cutthroats are known for their aggressive feeding behavior, especially in streams where they'll chase down prey. They'll often feed in riffles, looking for emerging insects, but can be found patrolling slower pools for fish or other larger food items. Their feeding can be more surface-oriented during hatches, but will shift to deeper waters as seasons change. Brown trout. Brown trout exhibit a sophisticated palate, eating a broad spectrum from insects to larger prey. They particularly relish mayflies, caddis, and stoneflies, but will not ignore terrestrial insects, minnows, crayfish, or even small mammals like mice if the opportunity presents itself. Their diet adjusts with the seasons, focusing on whatever is most abundant or easiest to catch. Feeding habits. Browns are strategic feeders, often lying in wait for the perfect moment to strike, especially in still waters or slower moving streams. They'll feed in all water columns, from the surface during insect emergences to the bottom for crustaceans. Their predatory behavior peaks during low light conditions where they use stealth to ambush prey. Lake trout. Lake trout primarily focus on fish like cisco, smelt, and whitefish. While they do eat smaller amounts of insects or amphipods, their diet is dominated by fish, especially in larger mature specimens. In areas where fish populations are low, they might resort to invertebrates or even scavenging for food. Feeding habits. These fish are deep water hunters, often found in the cooler, deeper parts of lakes where they'll use their thermocline to their advantage for hunting. Their feeding strategy involves less movement, waiting for prey to come to them. They're active predators, capable of bursts of speed to catch fish, but their activity increases during the low light of dawn and dusk, when they're most likely to hunt. Understanding the diet and feeding habits of these trout species not only helps in catching them, but also in appreciating their role in the ecosystem. Each species has adapted uniquely to its environment. Now let's take a look at the different fishing techniques we can use to catch these guys. Fly fishing. Fly fishing is not just an art. It's often the most effective way to catch brook and cutthroat trout in clear, smaller streams where stealth and precision are key. You'll cast your fly to imitate the insects or small aquatic life these fish are accustomed to eating. When to use. Best during insect hatches when trout are feeding on the surface or just below it. It's about matching the hatch, using flies that look like the insects currently active on the water. Baits and lures. Dry flies for surface feeders, especially during mayfly or caddis hatches. Patterns like the Adams or elk hair caddis work well. Nymphs to mimic underwater stages of insects. Use patterns like pheasant tail or hare's ear. Streamers for larger brookies or cutthroats looking for minnows. Woolly buggers or muddler minnows can be irresistible. Spin fishing, usually using a spinning rod. Sometimes you can use a bait caster. This method is versatile and can be used for all trout species, but is particularly effective for rainbows and browns in larger rivers or lakes. It involves casting lures that mimic the natural prey of the fish. When to use. Great for covering more water quickly, especially when fish are less active, or when you're trying to locate fish in new areas. Baits and lures. Spinners like meps or rooster tails, great for rainbows in rivers or lakes. Spoons, Castmaster or Little Cleos for their flash and action, ideal for both rainbows and browns. And crankbaits, in lakes for suspended browns or rainbows. Crankbaits that dive to the depth where the fish are holding work well. Bait fishing. Sometimes nothing beats the effectiveness of live bait, especially in stocked or less pressured waters. This method can be particularly successful for rainbows and lake trout. When to use. Use when other methods fail or in waters where trout have a preference for natural foods over artificial lures. Baits. Worms, a classic choice for rainbows, especially in smaller rivers or ponds. Minnows, for lake trout or larger rainbows. Minnows can trigger aggressive strikes, though you want to check with local regulations on whether or not you can use these. Power bait. This scented bait is a favorite for stocked rainbows, particularly in still waters. Trolling. Trolling is your go-to for larger bodies of water like big lakes or reservoirs, especially for lake trout. It involves moving through the water with your line out to cover large areas while fish might be deep. When to use. Best when targeting fish that are suspended or in deep water, or when you need to cover a lot of water to find where the fish are holding. Baits and lures. Deep diving crankbaits. These can reach depths where lake trout hunt, like the Rapala Countdown or Man's Stretch. Downriggers. Use these to get your bait or lure to specific depths, perfect for lake trout. Spoons, large spoons, trolled slowly can simulate injured bait fish, attracting those giant lake trout. Ice fishing. Ice fishing transforms your approach. Focus on vertical presentations in cold, static water environments. It's very patience intensive, with the focus on deep water where lake trout linger during the winter. Baits and lures. Heavy jigs. Use these with live bait or soft plastics. Jigging spoons like the Swedish Pimple or Castmaster are effective. Live bait, minnows, or smelt are used under a bobber or on a jig to entice a bite from a sluggish winter trout. Tip-ups for setting lines and waiting for a flag to go up when fish takes the bait is ideal for lake trout. Remember, the key to success with these techniques is not just the bait or lure, but also understanding behavior of the trout in different seasons and environments. Adapt your approach to match the conditions and you'll find your catch rate improving. Seasonal behavior. During the spring, which is spawning time, especially for rainbows and browns, they move to shallow areas. Just again, as mentioned before, trout can be very shy, so you have to be very cautious and try not to disturb their spawning beds or their area, because they will be soon to jet off. During the summer, warmer water pushes trout to cooler tributaries or deeper, cooler parts of the lake. Dry fly fishing peaks for brookies and cutthroats during this time of year. During the fall, trout feed heavily before winter, making it a prime time for big catches. You can use streamers to mimic dying bait fish. And during the winter, slow down everything, fish deeper in lakes for lake trout, or look for warmer areas and streams for other trout that may be hunkering down for the winter. Now let's talk about something that's near and dear to me, conservation and ethics. Catch and release, which is the core of ethical fishing, and why it's crucial, especially for native species like brook and cutthroat trout. Catch and release ensures genetic diversity and population health. Some best practices you can use. Try barbless hooks to minimize the damage. Handling fish gently and keeping them wet and supporting their body horizontally. Reviving lethargic fish by moving them in the water until they can swim off on their own. Their spawning areas. Definitely want to respect their areas during the spawning season. Avoid disturbing these critical areas to ensure the next generation of trout. Understanding the regulations. Size and bag limits. These are designed for sustainability. For example, keep fish only within a size range that protects both the juveniles and the breeding adults. Seasonal restrictions. Some areas have catch and release only or closed seasons to protect fish during spawning and growth phases. Native trout species. Extra care for species like the Yellowstone cutthroat or the brook trout with stricter regulations to preserve fragile populations. Some conservation going beyond actual fishing for their habitats, support clean water initiatives and habitat restoration to ensure cold, clean environments for the trout. Invasive species. Prevent the spread of those invasive species by cleaning, draining, and drying gear. Stay educated, learn, spread knowledge about trout ecology and conservation. Also think about ethical angling and leaving no trace. Remove all your trash, including your fishing gear, to keep our waters pristine. Fellow anglers should respect each other's space on the water. Share knowledge, foster community, keep it fun. Every action we take as anglers shape the future of our sport. By practicing conservation, we're not just fishing, we're ensuring that these waters remain vibrant for future casts. And there you have it. From the vibrant rainbows to the deep dwelling lake trout, this is your primer on trout fishing in the U.S. Remember, each fish has its own story, so adapt, respect, and enjoy the chase. If you found this helpful, smash that like button, hit the subscribe for more fishing adventures, and drop a comment or two with your best trout story. Until next time, keep your line tight, your spirits high. Appreciate you, B's and G's.